Grand Chief Walter was with Keyway Tribal Council, Grand Chief Ivor Wilson of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and Grand Chief Harrison Septi of Manitoba Chiefs. And we will start with then with Chief David Williams taking the first.
Okay. Right, tervise, että tämmöistä nogaga no tagaik. And I ask him for the prayer, Dennis. Anyways, my name is David Monias, Chief of the Nation for Pemitsikamak. Being one of those people that have been working heavily and since 1990s on work for special needs children. One of the messages we wanted to state is that we would like the government, especially the new Liberal leader, Mark Carney, who is going to be sworn in today, and to really look at the issue of child welfare, but more specifically children's principle. We have a lot of our children, the most vulnerable children in Canada, that are being denied services. They're denied funding, and puts our First Nations at risk of going into deficits, and also our children suffering needlessly from a policy that's been retroactively implemented without notice to First Nations and without First Nations involvement. And this is something that has to stop. You know, we talk about reconciliation, and this is not reconciliation when you do things on your own, without us, about us. We must ensure that we are involved in every decision making that you're doing when it comes to our children, especially the special needs children and our families, as it affects our community and our ability to help those children. We are in a position to try and help our children when we had children's principle, but we lack infrastructure, we lack capital, and we lack funding to support those services that are being put in place, that was put in place, and now being taken back. So with that, I call on everybody, every First Nation should be taking this to court. You know, we should be taking action legally to call for a judicial review and file a judicial review on behalf of our children, and also the numerous employees that are being let go as a result of this cutbacks on funding. It was saying that national, but no.
Good morning. I'm Chief Cornell McLean. I'm the Chief of Lake Manitoba First Nation, and I bring to you today the very serious concerns of the Jordan's Principle cutbacks, the impacts of the First Nations to our off-reserve members as well. And it was done without consultation, but we're going to call them to task, as what my colleague said here. We are going to be doing a judicial review, the Interlake Reserves Tribal Council, along with the Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council, to call them to task, because I've said it before, and I'll say it again, is that every child matters. And, now our families are being impacted by these cutbacks by the government, which was solely made by the Indigenous Services Minister without consultation to our First Nations or to our PTOs. And now each First Nation and PTOs, and along with the Assembly, has to, lay off a number of people. And nobody wants to send anybody home, especially when the need is there for our children that need services. And, I also see that, some of the comments being made by the Health Canada team there, that there's food banks. Well, would they have the dignity to go to a food bank? I just put that out there because, we had one person there at Health Canada make all these decisions, say yes, yes, yes to every request that was made. And now there's millions of dollars owed back to these organizations, and they're going to put us into third-party management if we don't receive those dollars back. There's people that need respite services for the disabled children, and land-based stuff, which is greatly a great way to show our kids and our future leaders how to live off the land and how to make it in today's society and also in our communities. So. We're deeply concerned, and I call on the new Prime Minister to change the Indigenous Services Minister, to put somebody there that's compassionate for First Nation issues. This is the first minister that we've had that has not and has refused to meet with our Grand Chiefs, the Chiefs in Assembly, the Chiefs of the Assembly of First Nation. Like, there has to be a problem there why she doesn't want to meet with us and tell us why she made those decisions solely on her own as the Indigenous Services Minister. And, I think if we're told something and it's being told to us by her, I think we would understand. But when we're not given consultation and it's just done, it's a form of dictatorship. Miigwech.
Good morning. Thank you for the prayer to get us started. I want to thank the media that's here, taking the time to come and hear these issues. My name is Walter Wastitskut. I'm the Grand Chief for Keewatin Tribal Council. This is a recurring pattern in this country. A recurring pattern. The Constitution of Canada, the Indian Act, are braided together with the doctrine of discovery. Canada goes around the world touting its democracy. This country is a good place to live in. That was not my experience as a child born into this country. I was apprehended and forcibly confined in an institution of genocide. Time and time again, we see these shortfalls from the government of Canada. The people of Canada, the citizens of Canada, have been living a lie for so many generations that persecution of the original peoples is acceptable. It's a norm in this country, and it has to stop. We have a new Prime Minister today that will be sworn in a little while. He appears to be a person of principle. I call on him to meet with us to straighten this mess out. Thank you.
It is my honor to sit with my fellow chiefs and grand chiefs this morning to be the voices of our children, the most vulnerable in our society. And on this historic day, where the Premier, Prime Minister designate Mark Carney is being sworn in, we're hoping for a renewed commitment. A renewed commitment to our leadership, our chiefs. Unfortunately, the previous government has left a legacy of neglect, abandonment of a mandate that was given to them through the legal processes of Canada. And the minister that failed our people and failed our children should have been removed. We at MKO asked for her removal because we had no confidence in her leadership. She has left a broken and damaged Jordan principle. She has done a lot of damage to our children, and we are here to be their voices. It seems to me that the governments of the past and the government of today continue to bring harm to our children. We're still recovering from the unfortunate dark chapter of the residential school, where they targeted our children and victimized our children. And even to this day, our children are still being victimized by policies and legislations and the failure for the government to fulfill its fiduciary obligation to Jordan's principle. We live in a country that prides itself on their human rights, but the children's rights are being violated. The children that are in dire need of these services are being denied of essential services that they deserve. And we are the voice of these children. We cannot and will not allow that to continue. Because they can't speak for themselves. We're here to speak on their behalf. And we're directing this government to make sure that there's immediate action on the failure of this Jordan's Principle program. Because we will not rest until we see restitution and also the implementation of Jordan's Principle. We will not stand for this. We will not accept it. So we're calling on the new Prime Minister to sit down with us and let's forge a path that is better for our children. Ekusani, ginaas commit now.
Grand Chief Carter Wilson, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to say thank you to Dennis Whitebird for the prayer, and I acknowledge all of the leadership that has spoken before me, our chiefs and our Grand Chiefs. The reason why we're here today is that Indigenous Services Canada, they have not responded meaningfully to our repeated calls for action. When we're talking about our children, we are not going to stop. We are going to continue to fight and to push and to advocate for the services that First Nations children deserve. You know, when we think about the beginning of Jordan's Principle and how this mess was created right now, what we see, Jordan's Principle was an experience that one of our First Nations families had to deal with government. Different levels of government treated our families in such an awful way, and that's why we're here today, and that's why Jordan's Principle has become a ruling. One of our children had to experience, the different levels of bureaucracy because of government. And, I honor, Jordan River Anderson and his family. And so here we are today, this ruling. It was a ruling that speaks to services for First Nations children. Doesn't matter where you're located. Doesn't matter if you're on reserve or you're off reserve. This is a service that is for our children, for First Nations children. So when this became a ruling, leadership, First Nations leadership, we had stated that we know what we need for our families, for our children. We know what the guidelines should look like. We know what the services need to look like. But yet again, government, Canada, would not listen to us. And that's why, like I said earlier, we're in this mess today. And this is not a mess that we created. This is not a mess that First Nations leadership created. This is not the mess of our people, of our communities. But yet we're being blamed for this. We are being blamed for the mess that Canada has created. And so when we think about Jordan's Principle and all of the beautiful services that our children have received up to this point, we were given the opportunity as leaders to provide services to our children. But these guidelines were not created by us. So formally, I was able to, lead my own nation as chief. And when I was providing that leadership, the messaging that I received is that you can spend money on your children, spend, never say no. That was exactly the message that I received when I was chief. I know that is the message that all of our leadership received when Jordan's Principle became, this service for our children. And so now, because the message that our leadership received was to spend on all of our children, which is great because our children need that support, our children need that service. But now, because Canada thinks that we might be overspending, Maybe that's their thoughts. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing right now. None of us actually know what Canada is doing. Canada has not responded to any of our correspondence when it comes to Jordan's Principle. And right now, what we see is that services have been halted for our children. Services have been halted for our communities. Services have been halted for our nations. And this is because Canada does not know what they're doing. Canada does not know what they're doing when it comes to Jordan's Principle. So if you don't know what you're doing, stop what you're doing and give it to the First Nations people, where we know what we need for our families. We know exactly what we need to do. Stop dictating what we should be doing for our children. We have the answers. We are telling Canada right now to stop what you're doing. Listen to our leadership and what we're saying today. We will create the guidelines surrounding Jordan's Principle and how you will work for us, because it's not the other way around. We do not work for you. Indigenous Services Canada, you work for us. You are there because of us as First Nations people. So you need to come to the table with us. Otherwise, we will have to take further action. Miigwech. You'll speak now? Okay.
Well, I can tell you that I can understand his frustrations, because it was a dependency that was created by the government for the First Nations, right? So now it's our members, the ones that feel that they're being mistreated by the program, that are lashing out against the membership. And they've reached out to the Anderson family, because I had a family that I spoke to my colleague here about, and it was about that. But meanwhile, they didn't know the resources that we had put out for that family. I explained to Mr. Anderson the resources that we had put out for this family, and that there was no neglect they were serviced, they had a home to go to, and all of her claims were false, which was found out by another news, I think it was City News, found that out, that everything was being done properly. So I can understand his frustrations about where, the blame falls on First Nations, when it's not up to leadership. We have coordinators that run our programs. We're not administrators. We're advocates for our nations. So the blame that he projects towards the First Nations is somewhat true, but untrue, because the coordinators do what's best for each family and the need. And sometimes there's a lot of wants, but you only do it based on need.
And I would have a follow-up question to that, though. So is the problem with the coordinators then? Because, it looks like, if you look at the Indigenous Services Canada statistics, they're saying this just exploded. People are asking for money, people are going on vacations, so is the coordinators the problem as well? There's a representative from Canada that came to us on more than one occasion and said what Grand Chief Kyra said: spend, spend, spend. He said that to us on more than one occasion. We expressed concern about how this money was being spent, and they returned that with spend, 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 or responded to it with those three words: spend, spend, spend. Yesterday I had a meeting with a federal representative. In July 11, I asked for a full costing out for the 11 nations that we work with in northern Manitoba. Yesterday was March 13,
still no accounting whatsoever. And I asked them, what is wrong with your financial system? If I spend something today, it's recorded in our financial system. It can be printed out at any time. There's definitely something wrong with our financial system if they can't get control of this. So when you ask who's to blame, Canada is to blame.
Just a short response to your question. And this is a federally orchestrated situation. And it's also a case of dividing our people and getting our people to attack our leadership, when this is not a problem that we created, but we take the blunt of all this blame. But we're here to rectify and correct this blame that's been placed upon our leadership and even our coordinators. It was by the instructions of bureaucrats that they acted. So therefore, I don't think that they are to blame. They were following instructions by bureaucrats. And that's the whole problem with bureaucrats. They're always there, regardless which government is in power. They're there. They're the same people, same agendas, same motives. That's my issue.
We've become, over time, we've become a very good retirement plan for bureaucrats.
So I actually want to ask about the individual who was doing the approvals. I've heard from chiefs that they got approvals sometimes orally, sometimes by text, and not through the official process. Chief Muniz, I shared with you, just because I had your text number, ISK's response to that. They say they never do that. So I'm just wondering where the confusion was of chiefs believing that they had an oral approval or text approval from this individual, and now ISK saying they said they never do that except for an emergency, so it's followed up with a written approval afterwards. So what happened?
Okay. Maybe I can respond to, based on my experience with our First Nations, our nation, I should say. First of all, I would say that there's a lot of misinformation being provided by the government of Canada. And unfortunately, the media gravitates towards that when it comes to spending with First Nations on any program that helps our children and families. Most of the programs and requests have been processed and have been met with approval by ISK. Namely, Chu Catro, I'll say his name, because he's the one that stated spend, 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 to meet the needs of your children and to help your families. And some of those things are looking at infrastructure, capital costs to meet the needs of children. Many families are in Winnipeg not because they want to come to Winnipeg, it's because they are here for medical reasons. They are here to access resources and capital and other services that are available in Winnipeg, but not on reserve. So when we try to create infrastructure, build infrastructure and also capital, the resources support the services that they need to live on, thrive on reserve. You know, that's being cut back, and now they're being sent back to, or having to remain in Winnipeg. And those same children and families are now being denied. We have documents, we have emails, we have minutes of meetings that we have had with ISK, with the same individual and so forth. That's why we're going to go to court. We will present that evidence. And we did not mismanage any money. We identified a resource for the children. We identified services that were required for the children. And this is what's required. And we submitted those things. This is the reason why we will be in deficit, because we were promised to have these things funded by ISK. And now they are coming with a new policy called Back to Basics. And they're retroactively implementing this Back to Basics policy. And now that puts us in a bad situation, because now they're renegading on their promises and their word, basically. And none of you know exactly what each First Nations children go through. We don't, unless you know as a worker, as a coordinator, what that child needs, the unique circumstances that they fall into. And by spending money to provide services so they can live like the rest of us, and then to be blamed for misspending by providing those services when Canada is responsible as a fiduciary obligation to provide those services to those children and that family. That is blame. That blame is to be going straight back to the government of Canada, not to the First Nations, not to the coordinator, certainly not to the staff, and not to the children that are suffering right now. You know, it's like saying back to the days when residential school first came out, that we were to blame, and now the blame is being put back on us, that we're failing these children. And of course they're going to use media, and of course they're going to use other families and stuff like that to say that we're misspending, because those children, those people are hurting as well. I was there when Jordan was, when we were dealing with that case at that time. There was 2 cases. And it was something that there was no infrastructure for that child to return home. There was no housing, proper housing for him to deal with his respiratory problems and all these multiple complex health needs that are required. The physio, the speech therapy, the occupational therapy, and all the other things that he needed. There are many children like him that are in our community right now that exist that need the service and are at risk of dying. This policy contributes to that genocide because that's what it is. Because it killed a child, and that's why we have a Jordan's principle. And we are going to do everything in our power as chiefs, as leaders, to make sure that we provide those services one way or another. And if you're going to spend money to make sure that that was designated for them, to help them survive, to live a comfortable life, then of course we're going to do that. I can't say that I'm sorry for that. But we didn't misspend the money. We were led to believe that this was something that we were allowed to spend money on, the infrastructure and the capital and all these other resources that were there. And now they're renegading, they're backtracking and saying back to basics, retroactively. After all this time, for 11 months, they didn't talk to us for a while, except through emails and through saying, "Oh, spent, we're okay." Then 11 months later, said, "Oh, I don't have the mandate to provide those services for you, to provide the funding for you." And then refused to talk to us. And I'm sorry, but, if they're going to be pointing the fingers, it should be back to the policy, back to the people who developed those policies without us. They led us to believe that we will be providing children and saving our children. And here we are, back to calling on Canada to call on the government to do the right thing. Save our children, they matter. Help our children, they matter. Help our families, they matter. And help our communities to build the infrastructure and the capital to support this service, this much needed service. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up with your question. So I'll just let you know that last year, the summer of last year, we had the Jordan's principal staff come from Ottawa to come and do an audit on Interlake Reserves Tribal Council, SNAP audit. And we said, you cannot take our financial information. We will share it with you. Lo and behold, they took our financial information. We're sorry that we took your information, they said, but it looks like everything is clear. You're spending the money the way that it's intended to, but we're only spending the money that we were told to, because I have emails, text messages from Joe Gashro, and I called him the best chief in Manitoba because he never said no. And that was every meeting we went to, and he promised people in our First Nation, and he created monsters of these people because they kept coming back for more. They kept saying, well, Joe said so. Well, Joe said so. Well, you know what? Go see Joe. And that's it. Now they start saying to us, refer your members, unruly members, to the regional office. Why? Because you made us do that. That's why. We didn't want to, but that's the nature of what we had to do as leadership, because you can only accept so much blame but I'm not going to take the blame for him for creating this dependency that he's done for First Nations. We got you.
Can I just follow up and ask, you're talking about filing a lawsuit, is that imminent, or is there a date where you're gonna file, or are you just putting it out there that if this doesn't get resolved, you will?
No, it's not. We have a meeting planned today with a lawyer that the Interlake Reserves Tribal Council and Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council, that we are going to be asking for a review of the decision, because it's like Chief Mooney has said, they can't go retroactively and make that change in the policy when we asked for them to create policy from the beginning and they denied it. So now they're kind of being hypocrites by saying, now we're going to create policy because the dependency got too great on the First Nations and Health Canada can't afford to pay their bills that they owe First Nation communities.
Sorry, just one more, because the Interlake Tribal Council, I understand that you're supporting paying ahead for a child that had medical needs of $1,000 a day. Did you get reimbursed for that?
Nobody's gotten reimbursed. The thing with that is that, and I've been in contact with Health Canada reps, and I sit on the Jordan's Principal Task Force for AMC. I've contacted them to share information with AMC to say, well, where's it at? Where's the money at? Like, when is it going to come? You made promises that it's going to come. I spoke to Rod Graham and I said to him, you're going to put this organization in deficit here if we don't hear back. I understand First Nations are important. I'm a leader of my community, and I ensure that we get what we need from the Jordan's Principal program, what's owed back to us, and we've gotten that. But now it's time to fight back for the organizations that, like Grand Chief Sati said, that for the kids that can't speak for themselves, for the families that can't speak for themselves. So we're going to hold them to task. And I've mentioned that in our executive meetings, in our financial meetings, that there has to be a way. We might have to go to court and call them to task, because you have emails. Everybody has emails, and they're not telling the true story when they say they didn't say that. When the decision was made in December, Joe Gashro disappeared off the face of the earth, and they said, well, he's gone away on family leave. Well, we don't know that, and I'm not saying that he didn't, but where was he to answer these questions?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Zoringo's with City News Winnipeg. The last time we saw all the chiefs and grand chiefs come together was when National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nefnak was also in attendance, talking about Jordan's Principle. And she stated that if nothing would happen on Canada's part, that there may be a need for the First Nations to go on a state of emergency. Is that still something that is being talked about or discussed?
The Kuwaitan Tribal Council declared a regional state of emergency March 23, 2023. We continue to live under that state of emergency. Individual First Nations from our region had declared numerous states of emergency on different occasions for different reasons. We declared a regional state of emergency due to system-wide failure on public safety, health, and infrastructure. All of those situations still exist. Nothing has improved, and we don't expect to see any improvements in the foreseeable future. After we declared the regional state of emergency, we had a meeting with federal representatives. And out of frustration, one of our chiefs made the comment, if you don't want to help us stay alive, at least pay for our funerals. Because Canada does not even pay for funerals.
I'm just going to add a comment to that. When we look at the whole process for state of emergency, when a nation calls state of emergency, that is essentially supposed to, call to action, call to task Canada to respond and to provide resources. For myself, when I was in a role as chief and we called a state of emergency, what that process looked like was even in the resources that were provided to us didn't even come right away. So there's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of stuff that we continually deal with every single day when it comes to Canada. And so this whole system that we have to deal with when it comes to our children and fighting for our families, for our nations, it's frustrating, and one day I know that it will change, but today this is what we have to deal with. So, calling a state of emergency, will call Canada to task, but even that process is slow.
So according to S, they're saying, people were asking for modeling headshots, people were asking for vacations to warm places and stuff. If First Nations leadership was to take control over this program, over Jordan's principle, would things like that be clearly outlined as not being funded, or would those things still potentially be funded?
Well, I can tell you things that were being requested, and you're right, were based on need, not on wants. And a lot of those requests were being denied. So a lot of times we had taken it back to the Health Canada, to the Jordan's Principle team, and said, well, here's what the request is. And lo and behold, go and pay it. There's a trip to Vancouver for soccer, pay it. Those were requests that we have emails that we are going to use as evidence against Health Canada. All of the requests that were being made, there was a request for car payments, cell phone payments, various things, rent payments. You say you do it once, they keep doing it till we tell you not to do it. And myself, I pay my own rent, and it's $1,600. Some rents were $2,500, $3,400, living the lavish lifestyle. But that was a dependency created by them. They created the monster. So.
But, and that's one thing for them to have created it, but they've now flipped it. It's not their problem. This is your greed.
Yeah, but you hear.
No, I don't think that's inappropriate at all. That's what the government has said. They've flipped it, saying that this is greed. This is First Nations being greedy, right?
But this is First Nations Chiefs. That's an inappropriate question.
You don't want
to the chief.
Okay, you don't want to respond to that?
I can respond. It's not being. It's not greed. It's not greed. It's dependency. That's what you do it once, you're going to do it again. You're going to keep doing it, right? If you do it once, you're going to do it again. Because I got away with it the first time, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to try again. I'm going to try until the deny is till you're denied, right?
I want to address that as well. I think with government saying that's greed, and again, most of the things that we paid for were based on need, not greed. And the high cost of requests that we had received, even through this organization, were vetted through the province and through the provincial region, Manitoba region of ISK, and they're the ones that approved those things, not us. And what we're trying to do is trying to make sure that we are meeting the needs of children. They're saying back to basics. Yes, that's what we said. If that's a new policy you want us to follow and stuff like that, let's talk about that. What does that look like? How do we transition from what it is now to the next? And what we're going to do to make sure we meet the needs of this children. What kind of policy will work on reserve, not off reserve, right? And that's the thing that we want to do. I mean, that's what we want to do. But don't come and say that, okay, it's back to basic and it's retroactive. After all this time that you said that the policy was spend, spend, spend. We were responsible with our funding. And when everything that we denied or that was questioned was referred back to ISK, and they're the ones that approved those things because their high costs that we received went up to ISK, and they approved it. We didn't approve them. Most of the approvals were fairly limited. We operated with a limited budget, and we operated that for years, for quite a while, until the high cost of requests that we received came back to us, and then we reverted back to the people who actually had the authority to say yes or no, because most of the requests were above and beyond our capability and our capacity to provide those services. That's why we turned to ISK for those things, and they approved them.
And I would like to say thank you to all of you. I understand Grand Chiefs have another engagement to go to.
Unless the Chiefs want to continue.
Unless the Chiefs want to continue.
No, the Grand Chiefs going. We're done too.
Thank you so much, Chiefs. Thank you, Elder. Thank you, Maria.